Okay, we're looking at Luke, and we are on the threshold of a major shift in the Gospel of Luke, one of those transition points. And we've seen a few of them. We went through in Luke kind of an introduction where we've got a lot of infancy stuff and childhood stuff going on in Luke. A lot of it distinct because all the birth stories are unique to the Gospel of Luke. A story of Elizabeth and John the Baptist, all that's unique in Luke. The Mary and the angel is unique to Luke. The birth and the manger is unique. Jesus going to Jerusalem when he's an infant to be presented, that's unique in Luke. Jesus going as an older child, going to the temple, all of that's unique to Luke. So all of these things there's a lot of stuff that Luke includes in his gospel. And we pass through all of that and other preparatory stuff like the baptism and
he kind of chronicles Jesus.
He does. And that's something really interesting. Clearly, it would appear, I shouldn't say clearly, it would appear that he's drawing from traditions that the others don't have, the other evangelists don't have, because they don't mention it, Paul doesn't mention it. So it would seem to be maybe a lack of knowledge. It's also, though, important, and always to file away why he's doing this. Why would he include this? Why does he feel this is necessary for his community to understand who Jesus is? And like, for instance, in Mark has nothing about anything before Jesus' baptism. That's when Jesus first appears in Mark. There is no mention of Jesus. Well, that's kind of interesting. What does that tell us about Mark's perspective on who Jesus is? If he doesn't do anything, there's no indication of Jesus' life before the baptism.
Yeah, he kind of just starts from there, like almost like from adulthood.
Life. Yeah.
As opposed to
would they have read each other's writings?
Some of them couldn't have, because if Mark is first, and I believe Mark is first, I think Mark is probably somewhere in the 70s, 80, 70. If he's the first, he couldn't have read from anybody else. But what I think they all do, and I've kind of challenged y'all to maybe use this image. I mean, this image has meant a lot to me. It's helped me a lot. All these evangelists, imagine they're sitting at a desk, and the desk is covered with little pieces of paper. Because even Mark, if Mark is writing in around 70, early 70s, right around the destruction of Jerusalem, if that's when he's writing his gospel, we're still talking about something that's 40 years, 35 years after Jesus is gone. So he's writing way after Paul. Paul's been gone for, maybe 20 years. So this is a long time after. None of the evangelists are writing right after Jesus. None of them are doing that. All of them are later, and so all of them are looking back on Jesus, because I think in the early church, getting stuff down, one, it's hard to get it down because writing is so precious. The other reason is the early church didn't think it was necessary. Because if Jesus is coming back any second now, why spend time writing down anything about what he taught? I mean, why teach what Jesus taught if tomorrow he's going to be back?
And the expense of writing it.
At the expense of writing it. So we've got Paul who's writing letters, but all of his letters are specific to congregations. And when you compare his letters, they aren't all exactly the same. If you compare the Corinthian letters with the Galatian letter, and with the Philippian letter, man, we're talking about major differences in approach because the three congregations are different. If Paul took the same approach to all three, he wouldn't be sensitive to their needs. So the Paul's perspective is very different. By the time you get to the second generation, or with somebody like Luke and Matthew, and probably John, the third generation, You're talking about people with a different perspective on what's important. Now it appears as though Christians are going to be around for a while. Christianity is going to be here. We're not talking about an end soon. Therefore, we better start getting down solid teachings, because we're going to have to live this Christian life for a while. And that's why I think one of the reasons Luke puts such an emphasis on teaching disciples lessons. How do you live as a disciple in this world that you face now that Jesus has been gone for a while? And I think, I think what you end up with is you have Mark, and I've kind of mentioned this before, but I think you have Mark as the first gospel written. And understand, too, just as there are people writing all kinds of stuff, about Jesus. This isn't, this is like the Wild West. There's no book, there's no Bible that you can refer to. So everybody who writes is writing stuff. There's a lot of ancient gospels floating around that never ended up in the canon, didn't end up in the Bible. But it's not like there were only 4 that existed. There were a lot of gospels being circulated because different people believed Jesus was important for different reasons. The early church, when the church starts putting together the canon, looks at these gospels and says, well, this one's stupid. This can't be inspired. This one's not inspired. I believe the Spirit's involved in that process. But, the gospel of Philip, that's not inspired. The gospel of Thomas, that's not inspired. The gospel of Peter, that's not inspired. All of those were circulating, in the ancient world. But that when it appears as though Christianity, the church, is going to be around for a while, now you got to start coming up with something that's a little more solid, a little more consistent, but not all over the place. Even with that, they chose 4 gospels instead of 1. Could have chosen 1. First person to put together a sort of a proto-New Testament was a person named Marcion. And this would have been around the year 180 AD. So it would have been maybe 100 years, 90 years after this stuff is written. And what he did, and he put this together as authoritative for his church, he had some of the letters of Paul and the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And that was his canon. Now, it wasn't because he wasn't exposed to other Gospels. It's that he believed that was the gospel that you turned to. That's what you relied on for truth. The early church said no to Marcion. We think all 4 gospels, even though we realize they're different, we're going to include all 4 because each of them gives a different impression of why Jesus is important. Therefore, all 4 are important.
Is it kind of like when you hand down things in your family? You tell this one this, and then he passes it on a slightly different, and
absolutely.
So it kind of
absolutely. And it's also if you get when a person passes and the family's together, and I meet with families after somebody in the family's passed, and I'll ask the family gathered, what is it that you want to hear? What's important for you to hear?
Yeah.
And as you kind of go around, different people in the family come up with different answers. Mm-hmm. Because different people see the person who's passed as important for different reasons. And it's not that, the son Bob is wrong, and sister Ethel is right.
Yeah.
It's that they view that same person in slightly different ways. And that's what the Gospels are. Now, you asked, are they? So I think certainly Matthew and Luke have Mark in front of them. Because 95% of Mark is in Matthew, which that can't be just coincidental. And both Matthew and about 2/3 of Mark is in Luke. Both Matthew and Luke use Mark's chronology. For one, it's a 1-year ministry, which is in both Matthew and Luke. And where Jesus moves from Galilee on, they use Mark's structure. Now, into that, both Matthew and Luke use materials that they both have, like the Beatitudes. Both Matthew and Luke have Beatitudes. Now, they're putting it in different places when they're using Mark's gospel. They don't put it in the same place. They put them in different places. But they've got a lot of Jesus' teaching. They've got, but they'll put it in different. How are things?
He's fine.
Oh.
I was praying for you. I wanted you to be careful and you to be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I was, I'm just, yeah. Well, I got your message. I said, well then why didn't you call and let me know you're alive?
Well, I think it's appropriate that we continue to pray for Ron for different reasons.
Might be a
Because
good
when you get home, Ron needs prayer.
True.
Yeah. So
Pretty much that's what I said. I hope I don't smell like a skunk. There's a skunk dead somewhere up near my house. Oh, do I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry. I will not disrupt anymore. I'm sorry.
I had this kind
yeah, you're sitting right there, close. I would never give you any indication about smell. So don't even worry about it. Okay, but anyway, they're drawing from common source, so they both have, and it's called there's a German quill. That's a German word referring to this set of material that Matthew and Luke seem to have.
What's it called?
Quill.
Quill?
Quill.
Like a feather.
Well, it's a German word. I don't know what the German word means. But it's, Q. If you ever read anything and it refers to Q, they're talking about material that Matthew and Luke have that you don't find in Mark. But you find it in their work, which means there must have been a source that they had in front of it. And then each of them are there are things that are unique to them. A lot of the big parables in Luke you don't find in the other Gospels. The prodigal of the prodigal son, the Good Samaritan, Lazarus and the rich man. All of those parables are unique to Luke. That you don't find them in the other four.
Wasn't there something about the scrolls that they hid them or stole them? I just remember a little bit about their.
They found much later, and we're talking about like in the 50s. There are two sets of scrolls that became. They're always finding scrolls, hidden places. The Dead Sea Scrolls was a big deal. I had a conversation with somebody, in the last 2 weeks about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls, that's Old Testament, mainly Isaiah. So the Dead Sea Scrolls have nothing to do with the New Testament, but a collection called the Nag Hammadi, which was found in Egypt, was a collection of Christian scrolls that included some of the material that's in the New Testament, but it also included other things that aren't in the New Testament. There's something called the Gospel of Truth and the Gospel of Philip. Now, one of the things that with most of these Gospels that weren't included in the Bible, there was a good reason why they weren't. A lot of them reflected a philosophy that was heavily influenced by Greek philosophy. It's called Gnosticism, that focuses on knowledge and that you need a secret knowledge to understand God. And a lot of those Gospels.
Gnosticism.
Yes, it's Gnosticism. And in Greek, gnosis means knowledge. It's Gnosticism involved a secret knowledge. It's based on Platonic philosophy that the spiritual world is better than the physical world. And there's a whole, there's a whole philosophical system, and it had a lot of influence over Christians. You get hints of that in the New Testament, but as it is. But if you look at some of these Gospels that weren't included, it is front and center. The Jesus is here. And a lot of it is Jesus wasn't a human. Jesus' humanity is de-emphasized. Jesus' flesh is de-emphasized. Like there's one story from one of these Gospels that Jesus, right before the crucifixion, the Christ left Jesus. And so Jesus died, but the Christ watched the crucifixion. Because the idea that God would die, that the Son of God would die on a cross, that violates this idea. So the Son part of Jesus left and watched the flesh die. because for them the flesh is what's inferior. It's the spirit that's important. A modern group that still believes this is Christian Science. All of Christian Science is this same idea, is Gnosticism, with a more modern spin. So, but anyway, that's sort of the origin. Now, John is something entirely different. John is drawing from his own materials because we don't see you see very little contact between John, except around the crucifixion and the other Gospels. But John makes a great effort in correcting mistakes he thinks the other evangelists used in the crucifixion, like with Jesus carrying the cross. The Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that when Jesus was going to Golgotha for the crucifixion, they got Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross, his cross. That's what you see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but not in the Gospel of John. In fact, John says Jesus carried the cross himself, because in John, Jesus is always in control. At Gethsemane, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when he's praying, Jesus says, "Let this cup pass from me, but not your will, but not my will, yours." In John, when Jesus is doing the same thing, he says, "Father, what should I pray? That this cup pass from me?" Well, of course not. This is the reason I came. So it's almost like John is aware that the other ones wrote it, and he's correcting it. Because for him, Jesus is the one who is always in control. I mean, good gracious, in John, when they come to arrest him, what do they do? They all fall on the ground. And Jesus allows himself to be arrested. Jesus is never out of control or in other people's control in John.
Now
He is always in
the
control.
man that they made help
Come
Jesus carry the cross, he was unwilling. If he could have not done it, he wouldn't have done it.
Well, no mention in the gospel, just that
He
did it.
But
Yeah.
you get the perception is that he really didn't want to do this. He kind of, didn't want to carry. I wouldn't want to, but for him I would. But I'm saying if you ask me, you just want to carry a cross, I'd say no. But do you think he became? I don't know. I kind of get the impression he became a believer.
Well,
Where's that found? In what gospel?
you see that in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Or you see the
Of
gentleman carrying the cross?
Of somebody carrying the cross.
Gotcha.
Not in John. In John,
Gotcha.
Jesus carries the
Yeah.
cross. There are going to be stories later. What's going to happen is there are going to be stories that develop on all these characters. In fact, on all the disciples. If you look, if you Google it and look on like Wikipedia or something, there's stories about how all of the apostles died. Well, they're stories. I mean, if you want to believe the stories, that's fine. I don't know what's true and what's not, but they're stories that were generated later. There's nothing, in a historical record that indicates that these things happen. So that if somebody says, "Well, this is the way Thomas died," okay, if you want to trust this story, that's all right. Go for it. But there's really the history behind it is really, really sketchy. And that's with Simon of Cyrene. Well, with Pontius Pilate, there's a whole story about him because he goes to Gaul and becomes a Christian and goes through all this stuff. What people do in the ancient world is what Christians do is they develop these characters, not unlike. And kind of making connections. Like I said, I organize material. If anybody's watched The Chosen, what they do in The Chosen is they take these characters and give the characters background, give the characters personality, give the characters a backstory. Because the characters in the Gospels are they're not covered much. You don't know what motivates them very well. Most of them, they're just names that are thrown out. So you watch The Chosen and so-and-so is tall. So-and-so is socially awkward. So-and-so is aggressive. Well, where are you getting that? Mary Magdalene can read. Where you get that, I have no idea. But it's there. What the person has done is giving these characters personality, developing, and that's what the early church did. With these figures, they wrote stories about them. Now, are the stories true? I don't know. I don't know that their intention was to make them to write history.
I think it's probably with the chosen to make them more relatable.
Of course,
to
absolutely.
people, and so they can get the word of faith through their story by making it more relatable. Because if you don't know the Lord, watching that, you could come to know the Lord.
Well, the only problem is,
Go ahead.
and this is the problem I have, this is a problem I have with. I have no problem if we watch a presentation like that as fiction. I have absolutely, and appreciate what's written, and all of them have meaning, and all of them have lessons that, are good. What concerns me is when you have a study, or you have a discussion, as though that's Word of God, and it's not.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's not Word of God. It's the writer's interpretation. We can read it. If we wanted to read the Gospel of Mark, we could read it. I could read it out loud in about 40 minutes to you, because it's not that long. The Chosen is on what? Season 3? Season. Now, I'm not criticizing it.
I've never.
I'm not criticizing it. But season 3, you can read the whole Gospel in 40 minutes. Where are they getting the stuff?
The extra.
And Shelley, you asked, and then I want to get into this. You asked, and something I've thought about, and I've used it as an example. You asked when I first started doing studies, because y'all were watching The Chosen. You said to, and I'll remember, was Matthew, not the gospel, but the character, was Matthew really socially awkward? Was he really kind of a nerdy kind of figure? Why would the writer present Matthew as a nerdy, socially awkward figure? Because that's the way we see tax people, IRS agents now.
Yeah.
That's the way we see them now. So of course the writer writes, because he's writing it for us. If he portrayed Matthew as Matthew probably was, tax collectors, they were more like mobsters. These were very tough, unsavory people.
Yes.
They were not nice at all. Because they collected money, and how they got the money was up to them. The Romans just wanted their payment. He would not have been, kind of nerdy. I'm looking at books. That's not tax. They would chewed him up. But he's not writing, history. He's writing something based on kind of history. Coco, we're not going to do this anymore. So please be quiet, or I'm going to have to put you out.
I was going to say, you're going to have to take her up that way,
Yeah.
because she's making me sneeze.
Okay, come here, Coco. Come here.
She started, I'm not normally allergic, but I know when she does that, that's when I.
Well, she's throwing her stuff in your direction.
She's stirring up the dust or something.
Okay. So we are at a major change, because like I said last time, Jerusalem is the key. And when we get to chapter 19, verse 29.
I knew I was a little behind. I'm really not prepared.
Yeah, well, we're good. Right before we get there, at the end of, or in the middle of chapter 9, what has Jesus been talking about? Because if a major change happens when he enters Jerusalem, we're talking about a major shift in the story. What he talks about before he enters must be important, because this is the last thing Luke is conveying to his audience. What are the last stories we see before Jesus enters Jerusalem, beginning in 1929?
You want to prepare the village?
Well, right. Well, what are the big stories in the first part of chapter 19?
Oh, in the beginning?
Yeah, the beginning of that. Because this has got to be, if this is the last thing Jesus is saying to his disciples before he enters the city, for Luke, this stuff must be really important. He really wants us to know. This is sort of the end. What is it that he says right at the end? In the end of 18:19. There are three stories.
We talked about Zacchaeus.
Okay, we got Zacchaeus, and before that we've got, okay, the man with the blind man recovering sight, and then we have the parable of,
The man with the withered hand?
well, not the withered hand, that's much earlier, but we do have the parable, he tells the parable of the coins, the pounds. You know, he gives that parable. Now, if these are three stories, and remember, these writers love to write in threes, because readers are used to that. You know, these three stories probably are related and must be important. What becomes the importance of those three stories? Based on, and Janet, we talked about it last week, based on what do those stories have in common? Particularly those first two, but also I think the parable. What happens in those two stories, the blind man and Zacchaeus? What's the problem with both the blind man and Zacchaeus?
They both can't see.
That's it.
Oh,
They
okay.
can't see. You know, one is blind and one is short. And what happens to both of them? Yeah, I'm
They end up
sorry.
able to see.
That by the end of the story, they're able to see. Now, if these two stories are linked by the third, this parable, although at the beginning of the parable he gives us a context. You know, this is for people who are looking forward to the end. You know, I want you guys to particularly hear it. What's the point of the parable?
Getting to know Jesus.
Okay, well, getting to know Jesus, seeing Jesus better for who he is. That what's important is that you use what you've got right now, rather than to hold on expecting. You know, that you take a chance, you use what you got. Okay, bang, last story. Understand, Matthew, this is one of those stories that are in Matthew and Luke, you know, about the pounds, although they're slightly different. But they're put in different places. This one he puts right before he enters Jerusalem. In Matthew, it's in 25, closer to the crucifixion. Okay, so, bang, we've established that. In verse 28, 1928, where is Jesus going?
1928.
He's going to Jerusalem. And what do we know about Jerusalem? Has he talked about Jerusalem before? Yeah, boy, he's talked about it. Why has Jerusalem been important? How has Luke used Jerusalem? In the part that Luke is writing, the narrative part.
Because he had to go to Jerusalem.
That's where he's going to die.
Yeah.
This is where he's heading. He's heading to Jerusalem. Now we're going to find out. And since we know the story, we know everything big is going to happen in Jerusalem. Everything big. So Jerusalem is sort of the key to Luke and Acts. So he's going to Jerusalem. And what happens as he's getting close?
He sent the two disciples.
Okay.
to find
He
the colt.
he sends the two disciples and he tells them to do what?
Bring back a colt.
Okay, bring back a colt that hasn't been ridden, and in fact, even more specific than that, what does he? He doesn't just say, "Oh, go find a colt."
Oh, he tells them where to go to get
He
it.
tells them where to go.
Yeah.
You know,
Behind. They
yeah.
kind of like been there. He says, go behind and go get them.
Yeah, go get this colt that's never been ridden, and when somebody asks, like the owner, you know, why are you taking my colt? What are they supposed to say?
The Lord.
Okay, the Lord. Now, of course, Lord is a powerful word in the Bible, because the Greek word kurios is the word in the Old Testament, when you hit the name for God, those four letters, you never said the name of God out loud. Instead, when you saw those four letters, the reader would say Adonai, which aren't those four letters. It's another word. They'd say Adonai. And Adonai in Hebrew is translated to kurios in Greek, which is translated Lord in English. So that's a loaded word. Any Jew, Greek-speaking Jew, his ears would perk up when he heard kurios, just like Christos it would. But kurios is a powerful word. So when he says the Lord had need of it, that's That's a powerful statement. And in most of the translations, Lord will be capitalized, which the translator is indicating that this is a really an important word.
I didn't pick up, because I can't hear.
Yeah.
Well, you said Lord is Adonai, and then the Greek was?
Curios.
Curios.
Curios. If you transliteration Kurios.
And then it's transferred into Lord.
It's translated Lord.
Translated.
Right. And in fact, when you look at the Old Testament, in most translations, when you run across, you're reading the Psalms and you see Lord used, but all the letters are capitalized, that's that 4-letter name for God that you're not supposed to say out loud.
Right.
You know, you don't say that out loud because using the name, the Jews believe that's what was taking the name in God and taking the name of the Lord in vain, is saying his name, because saying his name claims his authority. And no human being has a right to claim God's authority. So you didn't use his name, you used another word. So anyway, and it's interesting, if you take the vowels in Adonai and put it to the consonants in the word, that those 4 letters that spell the name of God, that's how you get the word Jehovah. And Jehovah is not a Hebrew word. Jehovah is not a Hebrew. It's a made-up word. It's taking consonants from one word and adding vowels from another. Okay. And you get Jehovah. But it has no meaning in Hebrew.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. Okay, so anyway, he tells them to do it. Now, why is this colt an important thing? And it's the colt of a donkey, so it's not a horse colt. Why is this animal important?
Because
he's
versus
pure.
And because the king, when he came in from a triumphal war, he would come in victory and he'd enter into the city triumphantly on a horse. God is humbling himself by coming through on a donkey, is how I see it.
Well, good. Zechariah 9.
Yes, I love that.
Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, daughter of Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off chariots from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, from river to the ends of the earth. So this image, and remember I told you, I think Luke is the most profoundly Jewish of all 4 Gospels, because this is an allusion he drops in. Matthew does the same sort of thing, but then he says, well, this is to fulfill prophecy. So Matthew has to explain it. Luke uses it. His audience doesn't need an explanation. They know.
Right.
They know that this is what Zechariah talked about. This becomes the sign of this king that's going to knock a few heads together, the one that they might see as the Messiah, or the sort of the ultimate Christ, the final Christos, that's going to restore Israel. So riding this foal of a donkey, this colt, this is loaded Old Testament. This is a loaded Old Testament image.
It really is, and everybody should read Zechariah 9.
Oh, Zechariah 9.
It's huge with everything that Luke is talking about.
This as he goes in, this is what Luke wants, how he wants us to see Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, the donkey is pure. I mean, he's never been ridden. He's, it's sort of like when they do with their sacrifices, they have to be pure and so on.
Right.
So that's what Jesus gets to ride, is a pure,
Right.
clean, I guess I should say.
Yeah, and this is what Zechariah said.
Yeah.
Now, what's kind of interesting as an aside, as Matthew does the same thing, as he reads Zechariah, it says in Zechariah, a donkey on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Well, that sounds like it might be 2 animals. A donkey and the foal of a donkey. So when you read Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, Matthew is going to follow the letter of the law, and when they bring the animals to Jesus, and it says they put their cloaks upon them, it's plural, and Jesus sat upon them. So in Matthew, Jesus enters Jerusalem riding 2 animals. He enters Jerusalem riding 2 animals. Which is kind of interesting. But Matthew, if that's what the prophecy says, that's what he has to do. Luke realizes that's not a big deal, so he doesn't do it. Anyway, so he's going on a double. What ends up happening? So he sends him out. You're going to find this donkey. Tell him
exactly as he said.
exactly, which demonstrates what?
His authority.
Okay, demonstrates his authority, his insight, that this is true. Yeah, this is what's going on. This is something greater is going on here. All right, now when they get back with the animal, what do? When they bring the animal to him, hallelujah, they're just doing it on a colt. They're not doing it on 2 animals.
Yeah.
They're doing it on this colt, and what happens? They set Jesus upon it. And as Jesus, we're working with this prophecy from Zechariah. What happens as Jesus is entering the city?
People spread their cloaks on the road.
Okay, laos. People are putting their cloaks on the road. Why are they putting their cloaks on the road? Why would they do that?
To honor.
Okay, it's a sign of honor, a sign of respect. People are doing that. And as the people are doing that, Jesus is riding on this colt of a donkey. Who joins him?
Pharisees.
Well, before the Pharisees. You're right, Judy. Before we get to the Pharisees.
Disciples.
Who joins? Okay, we got a multitude of disciples. Now that's really interesting because we don't see it in the other Gospels. We've got a multitude of disciples here. Okay, and why disciples? What are disciples?
Believers.
They're believers, they're followers, they're learners, right? Multiple. And what do the disciples do?
Praising God.
Okay, the disciples praise God in a loud voice. Why are the disciples praising God?
For the mighty works they had seen.
Okay, that's right. Which suggests what? Why here? You don't have in the other Gospels, it's not the disciples who are doing this.
The crowd.
The crowds are doing it in the other Gospels. The crowds are the ones that are shouting. The crowds are not shouting this in Luke. It's the disciples are doing it. The disciples are shouting. The disciples are praising God. And Luke tells us why the disciples are doing this, which I think is something important he's saying to his church. Why they're praising God? Why are they praising God?
Because they've seen the
They've seen the works.
They've seen the works.
They've seen the work. So the disciples who have been with Jesus the entire time, they're the ones that are praising God because
They saw.
they saw him. They heard him. They witnessed him. They were with him. Therefore, the disciples are praising. That gives them the motivation. Luke gives them motivation for doing what they're doing. So this isn't like a sort of an ecstatic crowd that is just shouting. These are the people who have seen. Now, maybe this is, again, Luke is shaping this because he wrote this. This isn't a quote. He's writing this himself. Maybe it's a just subtle suggestion that if you want to get to this place, you probably need to what? A modern disciple. You probably would want to
Recognize Jesus.
recognize by
Faith.
Seeing.
how might we see now?
The Spirit.
How might we see now?
The Spirit. And the
Remember,
Word.
what does he say? What did they see?
The mighty works. So
It's all the mighty works.
we see that. We do see it.
How can we see the mighty works? What's that?
Through God's Word.
I heard.
Through God's Word.
What did you say, Judy? Oh, you didn't. You said, I heard.
Plan B.
Okay. We can do it through God's word. Luke has already written all of this.
Right.
This becomes a subtle little thing to his audience. If you want to be where the disciples are, where they're praising God as he enters, read what I've already written. I've already written about the mighty works he's done.
Yep.
Be a disciple. I think that's what he's doing. So we've got the disciples now. It's interesting, uses the idea of multitude, because like I said, I think this is starting something new. We've experienced a multitude doing this same kind of thing once before, one other time in the Gospel of Luke. Do you remember when a multitude offered this kind of praise? Do you remember? Way back at the beginning, when a multitude. I'm going to tell you what it is, if nobody guesses, and you're going to say, oh, gee, yeah, I should have known that.
Back during
I
the
don't want to
baptism.
say that, but I don't remember.
Before
Before the baptism.
Before the baptism. Think Linus and Charlie Brown's Christmas.
Oh, but the shepherds came and praised the Lord for the baptism.
The heavenly host, the multitude of the heavenly host. And I think this is not an accident. Luke is going back to the beginning. This is a major shift in his gospel. He is pulling the mighty works that Jesus has done throughout his life. He's going all the way back to the beginning, just like the angels offered the multitude of the angels offered praise. The multitude of the disciples are doing the same thing here. I don't think it's an accident that he's choosing to use the same word again. All right? Now, the fact that the disciples are doing that, not the crowds, become important. Because remember, Luke is writing to a congregation of what? Disciples. He's writing to a congregation of disciples. Therefore, they should be where these people are. This is not what you can expect the crowds outside the church to say. This is what disciples say. This is what disciples say. Now, understand, that's how Luke reads it. That's not how Matthew, Mark, and John read it, because they have the crowds doing it. They have crowds, not just disciples. They have other people doing it. Okay, now who is in the crowd?
The Pharisees.
Which is really interesting.
The Pharisees.
Because the Pharisees. And we haven't seen that before. That the Pharisees are in the crowd. Why does that become, why might that cause me as I read that to go, Pharisees are in the crowd. Remember, we looked at those three groups that we followed all the way through. And they were each distinct, right? We had disciples, they were followers. Well, they're praising God, right? And we had Pharisees, and they were, in the Gospel of Luke, Pharisees are always bad. 100%. You don't have a good Pharisee in the bunch. You know, they are always the bad guys. But who's in the middle?
The crowd.
The crowds are in the middle, and we don't know where the crowds stand. They're just there. You know, they don't understand because God doesn't want them to understand. They're always in the background, right? Now we've got the Pharisees where?
In the crowd.
In the crowd. Ooh, we get a blending of those two groups that used to be kind of separate. You know, I don't think it's important now, but it's going to be important later.
The Pharisees called him teacher in this too.
Yeah.
They say teacher.
Which tells us what about the title teacher?
Oh, educated.
Well, educated. What does it, since we know in Luke, Pharisees are never, ever good. They never are good. There's no Nicodemus in Luke. None. Pharisees are always bad in the gospel. If they called him teacher, what does that say about the title teacher?
It's probably not one to respect.
It's not an appropriate title. It's not a good title. It's not like they recognize something special about it.
They're being sarcastic.
Well, they're either being sarcastic, or we, the reader, know that we shouldn't be calling Jesus our just teacher, because he's so much more.
Yeah.
He's so much more than
And
teacher.
he also tells them in here, to tell his disciples to be quiet.
Yeah, he said, so if we have any doubt about who's shouting, Luke tells us we should have no doubt about who's shouting, because the Pharisees are saying it ain't the crowds that are shouting. Because remember, the Pharisees are in the crowd.
Yeah.
And they're there to trip them up. They're trying to get a reason to.
Well, it's kind of interesting. They ask this question, and how does Jesus respond? which is an interesting response.
He says to them, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out.
Yeah, the stones themselves will cry out. It's interesting that this image of stones there's a passage in another, everybody's popular, one of your favorite prophecies in the Old Testament, Habakkuk. Habakkuk talks about stones shouting out. Luke in his gospel has already, now understand, this little exchange between Jesus and the Pharisees is only in the Gospel of Luke. You don't see it in the other three. In Luke 3, and we see this in parallels, but Luke, I think, uses it here. In Luke 3, it says, bear fruit worthy of, and this is John the Baptist talking, bear fruit worthy of repentance. Do not begin to say to yourself, we have Abraham as our ancestor. For I tell you, God is able from these what? Stones. To rise up children of Abraham. When Jesus says the stones themselves will shout.
That's what I was going to ask.
What is he suggesting?
Nothing can stop the will of God.
It's that good. This is the will of God. This is the will of God. And what are we eventually going to see? What is the will of God? What's going to be the will of God?
Crucifixion of Christ.
Crucifixion and resurrection. And ascension and Pentecost. All of that's going to be will of God. So this is going to happen. This is going to happen. Okay, so he's there. He's entered the story of the entrance. What does Jesus do in 41? Which, again, this little passage is only in Luke.
He wept over it.
Okay, he weeps over, when he sees the city, he weeps over it. And what does he say?
If even you had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes.
Now there's an irony in what's said here. Because he says, if you'd recognize what's happening, it would make for you peace, or peace would come upon you, or you would experience peace. What's the irony about him saying that about the city of Jerusalem?
Because they once saw and then they don't.
Okay,
That's
certainly involved.
Hid from their eyes?
Yes.
Okay, certainly involved. What does the name Jerusalem mean?
Okay.
Salem?
Oh, yeah, they burn witches.
Well, yeah, they burn witches. Yeah, they burn witches in Salem. Yeah, but they're not doing it in Jerusalem.
Oh, well, I know they aren't,
Yes.
but I thought that was your reference.
What Salem is shalom?
Peace.
The city of Jerusalem. The name of the city is peace. So the very name of the city, the people aren't experiencing. If you're going to experience peace, go to a city named
Jerusalem.
Peace, yes, Jerusalem. Go to a city named Shalom, for crying out loud. And yet, they've missed it, right? But it's been hidden from their eyes, right? Which means, who's in charge? Same thing with the stones. Who's in charge of the story? God is in charge. Because it's not right now. What will happen to Jerusalem? After he says that he's weeping for Jerusalem, what does he say is going to happen in Jerusalem? Jerusalem's going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And a lot of graphic things about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the destruction of
The temple.
the temple. The temple's going to be destroyed. Now, when is this going to happen? Because this is going to happen.
Before his crucifixion.
Yes, it's going to be before his crucifixion. How many years before his crucifixion? Well, no, it's not before his crucifixion. It's going to be destroyed after his crucifixion, but it's going to be destroyed about 20 years after the Gospel of Luke is written.
Wow.
So Luke's audience already knows the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. They already know that because it's already happened.
Yeah.
They're reading this in the year 90 AD. Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70 during the rebellion, when the Romans tore down the wall, tore down the temple. So this is gonna happen. Now, why would Luke include this? Because you got 3 other Gospels that don't include this. Why is this something Luke believes is important for his people to know?
That's what I was going to say, he thought it was important.
Yeah, that God is important, that this is going to occur, but for them, it's already occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And what does Jesus say is the reason Jerusalem's going to be destroyed? It's going to lose their peace? What's going to cause Jerusalem to lose its peace and be destroyed?
Because of them using, you mean when they had the animals and all that?
Well, why is it here in just this little passage? Why?
They didn't know the time.
Because they didn't know. Right. And we've got this entry, that they didn't recognize that this is happening. Now again, this is being communicated to people who are living 20 years after it was destroyed. So they can look at this and say, oh yeah, it was destroyed. What's interesting is Matthew will allude to the destruction of Jerusalem. Mark doesn't, which kind of makes that interesting that maybe Mark, his gospel was written
much later.
Well, or much earlier, before it was destroyed. So he doesn't mention the destruction of Jerusalem, but Matthew does, and Luke mentions it emphatically here, that Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. Because the audience knows Jerusalem has been destroyed. For them, it's past tense. Okay, so this is serious business. What does he do next? So he's in the city. He's wept over Jerusalem. Where does he go next?
The temple.
He goes to the temple. And what does he do in the temple?
Drive out the money changers.
Well, what does it say?
He began to drive out those who were selling.
Okay. And then what, that's verse 45, right?
Correct.
What does it say in 46?
My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers.
So let me get this straight. In 45, he enters the temple, drives out those who are selling things, and then says, it's been written, my house is a house of prayer and not, but you've made it a den of thieves or robbers.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, time out. We're missing stuff here, right? When Jesus, in Sunday school, we talked about it in Sunday school, right? Cleansing of the temple from John.
Yes.
When Jesus cleanses the temple, what does he do when he cleanses the temple?
He goes out, kicks everybody out.
Who?
Jesus.
Wait, Jesus, who does he kick out?
The money lenders.
The money lenders?
The people
Wait a
that
minute,
buy
whoa, let me see your Bible. Where does it say money lenders? Or the money changers?
Well, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Oh,
No, it
golly
doesn't.
Moses. It doesn't say money changers. Ooh, that's interesting. What else does it not mention that we know from the other 3 accounts?
But he still calls it the den of robbers.
Right.
Turned everything over.
Oh, didn't it talk about turning over the tables of the money changers? What else does Jesus do?
Selling animals.
Selling animals! I don't see anything about chasing out the animals from the temple.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see him turning over money changer tables. That's really interesting. In Matthew, Mark, and John, Jesus chases out the animals and overturns the table of the money changers. And here, he drove out those who are selling things. Why do you think? Why do you think there's a difference there? Because to me, if I didn't have the other 3 stories, and I read, he chased out people selling things, I wouldn't think, oh, well, he's talking about sacrificial animals. I would think what? If as you read that, he chased out people selling things, what image do we have of people selling things?
Like merchants.
No,
Yes.
merchants. We got merchants selling stuff, not sacrificial stuff.
Yeah.
Just selling stuff. And what's that?
Clothes.
Selling clothes, selling pottery, selling stuff. He chases his people out. Now that's really interesting. not the sacrificial animals. And remember when we talked in Sunday school, on Sunday, the money changers were absolutely necessary. Why were the money changers why were the animals being sold necessary?
Because they had to be pure and spotless, and the money had not allowed to have an image on it.
Right. You had to sell sacrificial animals because people were walking a long way, and if they carried a lamb with them and that lamb wasn't pure, they couldn't sacrifice it. So the temple would sell animals that were approved by the priest.
Yeah.
And you couldn't buy animals with the coinage, and there's a lot of coinage. Coins are all over the place in the ancient world. And that's fine, because it's not the coin that has value, it's the metal in the coin that has value, so they don't care who's on it. But they do at the temple, because you can't have a face on that coin and buy a sacrificial animal at the temple, so you had to change your coins to temple coins. So you could buy the animals. None of that is in Luke. None of it is in Luke. Now, remember when we talked in Sunday school, I'm looking at Shelley because Shelley was there. Remember when we looked, and that's the story we looked at at John. Remember what it would appear John's point by chasing out the animals for sacrifice and the money changers? What was the point? What would appear to be the point that Jesus made? And in John it's really clear because of the next passage. It talks about tear down this temple in 3 days.
Because the temple was supposed to be a place of worship.
Right, but if you're buying sacrificial animals to worship,
it should be in the temple.
What is he suggesting about temple worship? If he chases the animals out and eliminates the ability to buy sacrificial animals. What does Jesus say? That worship has changed, right? And remember the next passage in John is Jesus says, tear down this temple and I'll build it back. And the people say, oh, you can't do that. It's taken 40 years to build the temple. And then John says, sort of in a parentheses, Jesus was really talking about his body. And remember the point that we were making is that Jesus is now the place. Yeah. Not a physical temple, but Jesus is a place where we encounter God.
He's the temple you should.
But in Luke, we don't have that. We don't have any allusion to the sacrifices changing. There's no judgment about sacrifice that we see in the other. In fact, it may be more judgment about merchant selling stuff, which is not a shocker in Luke, because how does Luke tend to view?
Den of thieves.
Well, den of thieves. Remember, Luke has got this big thing with rich and poor, and economics are a big deal in Luke. That he lifts up the low, pulls down the high. In Luke, the den of thieves may have to do with finance. That those sellers of things are.
I still don't understand why they couldn't do that right outside the temple. Like, put up those tents that they always put in different places.
Right.
Why couldn't they have that when the people come in, this is the animals, this is the money changer?
Their hearts.
Well, with the animals that they were selling were for the temple.
Yes.
I mean, you wouldn't use it for any other place.
Yes,
they were for the temple. And the money, the changed money, you wouldn't change money except to buy those animals.
Yes.
That would be the only reason you'd sell it. So those are associated with the temple. Getting rid of those means temple is changed. Mm-hmm. Here, if you just got merchants selling stuff, now we've got the temple has become kind of corrupted by financial things. Yeah. People are selling pottery in the temple. Heaven to Betsy, they may have a rummage sale in the temple. We in the church would never do anything like that, right?
Of course not.
Or sell food, or maybe rent out tables.
Well, the whatchamacallits ate the food that was in the temple. They were the
yes, that's right. Thank you very much. I think we can justify it.
Yes.
All right. So my point is in this cleansing, I think the cleansing is a little different. I think the other ones is really a change in worship. That the temple worship is no longer necessary. Now everything has changed, and I think here we don't have that. And why might Luke not have the same view of the temple that Matthew, Mark, and John. Why might Luke have based on what we've already seen, have a different view of the temple?
I'm kind of getting, because it's so straightforward. And Jesus says, yeah, it is written, my house is a house of prayer, period.
Right.
And then he says, but you have made it a den of thieves.
Right.
The temple is sacred. It's meant for God and God alone worship. That should not have any part in there for any justification that man can give it.
Okay. If he messed around with sacrifice at the temple, then his focus is on changing that sacrificial system. Here, we've got, I agree with you, I'm agreeing with you, I think that's exactly what he's saying. Luke has a much higher view, tends to have a higher view of the temple than we see in the other places. Because remember, in stories that we only find in Luke, when Jesus is a little baby, right after he's born, what do his parents do? Take him to the temple. When Jesus is 12-ish,
Take him to the temple.
take him to the temple. And even in that story it says they went.
He stayed at the temple.
They went every year.
Yeah.
It says every year for Passover. So the temple in Luke is a really positive place. And we're going to see this in Acts. They hang around the temple a lot. So the problem isn't with the temple. Since I think Luke is writing to a profoundly Jewish Christian audience, he is not attacking the temple. There's no attack on the temple. When you read the other Gospels, temple worship isn't necessary anymore. Luke doesn't even suggest that temple worship isn't appropriate. It's people who are doing non-worshiping things. They're selling stuff. That's the problem. Those are the thieves, not the people who are selling sacrificial animals. You see, I think what Luke has done is he's kind of changed the meaning, but also kind of protected the temple a little bit. That the temple's not the problem. And for Luke's audience, the temple is going. Now, does she need to go out? Because she probably needs the door's open, so she can't. Something else that's interesting when you look at this in Luke, the cleansing in Luke. When you look at the cleansing in both Matthew and in Mark, before the cleansing and after, there's a little story about Jesus in a fig tree. Do you remember that doesn't appear in
I
it?
don't like that story.
Yeah. What happens in the story with the fig tree?
The kids
There's no
are
figs
up in
on
the
it.
tree.
Right. And so what happens?
He curses it.
He curses it, and what happens to the tree?
It dies.
It dies. Now you say, "Oh, that's horrible." Well, it's given in this context. He cleanses the temple by getting out the what is essential for temple worship, connected to this tree that isn't bearing fruit, that withers and dies. Geez, what's being suggested by Matthew and Mark?
Better.
That Jewish worship is no longer bearing fruit. And there it withers and dies.
Yeah.
Luke does not include that story. Because I don't think Luke is saying temple worship withers and dies. It's gone because the temple's gone. But it doesn't, Jesus isn't changing that. This is not an attack on temple worship. The other cleansings would sure show, not attack, but that it's changed. There's no indication that Jesus is saying you need to change the way you worship. It doesn't say that. Doesn't say it. He's just chasing out people selling stuff. Very interesting when you start seeing how the evangelists are working. Okay, so but he does claim it as his house, right? So the cleansing is almost like a preparation for Jesus to start doing something that we see in verse 47. And what does he start doing in verse 47? Now we know why he's got to get the people who are selling stuff out, because the temple is going to be a teaching place. His Father's house is going to be the place where he teaches. And who were there? Chief priests and
teachers,
scribes and leaders. And just in case we're not talking about Pharisees, he doesn't mention Pharisees here, but just so that we know they're all on the same team.
Yeah.
They're all wearing the same sweaters.
Yeah.
One of these
They wanna
chief
kill.
priests, leaders of the, they want to kill him,
Kill.
right? Luke tells us that. Who else is there?
People.
Okay, we know that there are people, right, who are there. So what are we going to expect in chapter 20? What are we going to expect to see if in the end of chapter 19 we've got Jesus in the temple teaching, and we've got the bad guys there, and we got the people in the middle there? What are we going to expect Jesus to start doing?
For Jesus.
Yeah, what do we expect to happen in this temple?
He was teaching.
He is going to teach. So we're prepared to get out our papers, right? Get out paper, get out pads, and start doing what? Taking notes. Because Jesus is going to start teaching. Okay? That's why he's cleansed the temple. That's where he's going to start teaching. Okay, any questions about this entry and the cleansing of the temple? Very interesting in the Gospel of Luke.
It's really.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Something that is really focused on disciples.
I just want a real little quick question
Yeah.
about 48, and they could not find what they might do. For all the people were very attentive to hear him.
Mm-hmm.
Were they listening to him to catch him?
Well, what would it appear? What would it appear? What have they done, these bad guys have done in the past?
Spied.
They spied, and what are they looking for?
Anything that can.
Okay, they're looking for anything they could get to nail him. And they're going to do that because at this point,
Come here.
the people are spellbound. So they can't just push their way through the crowd and grab him. You know, they can't do that.
No.
So they got to wait for him to
Give you one more.
give them an excuse or a justification for grabbing them. They can't just go into a crowd and start grabbing people because the crowd may object, especially if the crowd likes what they hear. So they got to look for
Well, they said the
a
crowd was-
reason, a
The
justification.
crowd was grabbing.
But you know what's interesting? Luke has already told us that maybe those scribes and Pharisees and leaders are wrong. Because remember, he said the Pharisees were in the crowd.
Right.
The Pharisees were in the crowd. And that's going to be something, not a big deal there, but you kind of file away. That maybe the gap between the crowd and the Pharisees may not be as big as they think.
Too, they were in the crowd spying so that they could get more evidence that he, wasn't
Right.
doing what he was doing. But, it seems to me that if they were listening and they listened to how people believed in Jesus, and I know they didn't want Jesus alive for that reason, but it seems to me that the people are so believing what they're hearing.
Right.
And the Pharisees just can't handle that.
Why? And that's great. That's good. That's a good point, Charlie. Why aren't the Pharisees and the leaders? Why do they want to kill him?
Because they're afraid of him.
Why do they want to kill
Because
him?
he's got a large following, and so they're afraid of the people. They don't have the control. If he has the control, he's going to take over. They're very happy with it.
Let me rephrase this.
Yeah, go ahead.
According to Luke, and we've talked about it before, why do the Pharisees and the scribes, and now the chief priests and the leaders of the people, why do they really want to kill him?
Because he's right and they're wrong.
Because okay, good. We're getting close. Remember the story of the man with the withered hand. You keep on going back to that.
Because he believed without proof.
Well, we know, man with the withered hand. Remember, they're there. And he asks them a question. Because it's on the Sabbath, man with a withered hand. He says, but the question he asked doesn't have anything to do with healing. You remember the question he asked? Is it right to do good or evil on the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And their response is, it's silence. And then he says to the man, stretch out your hand, and he heals him on the Sabbath. And it's right after that they decide they're going to kill him. So as Luke presents it, Why do they want to kill him?
Making him look bad.
Because he does good. That's why they're so evil. This is pure evil. This isn't nuanced evil. This isn't how Luke is writing it. John, on the other hand, has Nicodemus, which kind of changes things, because Nicodemus is a Pharisee who grows and develops and changes. We don't see him in those guys in Luke. These guys are bad. And remember, I told you that makes sense if we put ourselves into the context of Luke's church. Because remember, the Pharisees are the only Jews left. The Sadducees are gone. The Zealots are gone. The Herodians are gone. The only ones left are the Pharisees. They're the only group left. Those are the enemies. Those are the guys dumping on the church. So there for Luke is very clear to his church. Don't trust them. These guys are bad. The crowds, on the other hand, but you can't trust them. They're out to get you. And that makes a lot of sense. That kind of makes sense. It does to me. If I was sending my daughter to walk on the north side of Pittsburgh, I would say, don't trust.
Anybody.
If she was stranded, don't trust anybody. Not that I'm saying, well, there's some good people. The risk is too great that she would pick the wrong person. So I might be tempted to say, roll up the windows, call the police, get them there, for her safety. Now that may be saying something horrible about me, but I sure I wouldn't want to tell her, oh, look with nuance.
They don't give you, they don't know the directions outside the north.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what Luke is telling his people. Don't trust them. Don't trust them, because they're not anti-Jesus. They are anti-good. They're not just anti-Jesus or worried about power. They are anti-good. They want evil. They want bad. That's how they use their law. For Luke, he doesn't want his people to see any nuance. On the other hand, John does. And that's why he presents them in a slightly different way.
I read it in here somewhere where in the crowd, that the ones that condemned Jesus were Christians.
No. And even stronger, it's even stronger in Luke. One of the things we're going to see in Luke at the crucifixion, and this is different than Mark and Matthew. In Mark and Matthew, Jesus is alone on the cross. He doesn't have any supporters with him. He is by himself, which is a big deal. That's why his last words are, my God, why have you forsaken me too? Everybody has forsaken me. You've even forsaken me. But he can't say that in Luke, because there are disciples there when he gets crucified. Luke says there are disciples at the cross. They leave beating their chests in grief. They're there. They witness the crucifixion. He doesn't get abandoned in Luke. Luke, he's not abandoned by his disciples. The disciples are still there. And therefore Jesus says something different. He's not dying alone. That's why he says to God, to you I commend my spirit. Because he's not dying in this isolation we see in particularly in Mark. Because disciples are there. So the disciples, I guess you asked if the Christians are saying it. You might be able to make the point in Mark or Matthew, because everybody abandons Jesus in Mark. Everybody does. There's nobody left. It would be harder to make that case in Luke, because the disciples continue to be disciples. They don't cease to have faith. Even on the Emmaus Road, there are two disciples talking. So the disciples are still around. Even before anybody has seen the resurrected Christ, you've got disciples around. Mm-hmm. You don't have that. Certainly you don't have it in Mark. You don't have it in Matthew either. He's alone.
Sort of gobsmacks you when you read that, because you're thinking it was the Jews, only the Jews who condemned Jesus.
Yeah. No, in Mark, everybody leaves it. Mark is, talk about depressing. You wouldn't want to do a program on Mark. Mark is a real downer.
I was going to say he was a guy that reminded you depression, what it's about.
Well, I mean, Jesus, when he says from the cross, my God, why have you
Yeah.
forsaken me? He meant it. He meant it. That's a person who's saying, I don't know why. I don't know what, maybe this had no purpose at all. He dies absolutely alone.
Excuse me, that was my bomb.
Your what?
My bomb, my purse.
Oh, I was going to say, whoa, we need to talk about this. All right, let's have a word of prayer and then you'll.
That's a good idea.
Yes. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we seek to be your disciples in a world where that may be a challenge. So help us to listen to what you have to say, help us to be attentive to what you did, and help us to claim your example as we live our lives. In the name of Christ we pray, amen.
Amen. That